Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our monthly webinar for Aedy, Alternative Education for Disruptive Youth. And I want to welcome our district and private provider, and certainly our my colleagues at Patent. My name is Gina Colarossi, and I'll be walking you through a few slides today on some updates that we felt were critical to share with the field in terms of the new changes that have happened as a result of the updates to Aedy. I'm joined by my colleague. Let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Jess Keener-Haas. I am also a part of the Aedy team.
Okay, and so I just want to do a quick mic check, and if I could have either just an okay. I'm wondering if it's on my end. Can everyone hear me okay?
I have everybody muted.
Oh geez, maybe that's why. Okay. All right, so I had one reach out. So if for some reason we are watching.
Your mic is staticky, Gina.
Okay, I know. I can. So I'm not exactly sure what to do in that respect. So
it's not for me.
Okay. Okay, thank you for those of you who have responded. I appreciate it. Patty, if for some reason it continues, just send me a message here and I'll grab somebody here in tech to see how I can maybe fix that. So let me know as we proceed forward. Thank you. Okay, so our patent mission, I think everyone is very familiar with in this group, but I will just kind of emphasize that the work that's being done with Aedy right now is in conjunction with the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and they have, we are working side by side with our colleagues there to be able to put together the application referral and monitoring systems for Aedy. So we felt it was important to kind of go back and refresh for everyone what Aedy is. And so statewide, as Jess and I have presented to different groups along the way, we have found that their knowledge base of what Aedy is varied greatly. And it started with the definition. So we're here to provide this to you so that you certainly provide it to the individuals that you're working with in the field. So the definition, it must meet disruptive. Thank you, Patty, for checking in. It must meet the disruptive student under section 1901C. And certainly that any Aedy program, whether it's an operating program or ascending LEA, must have an application on file through the Leader Services system in order to send to a program or operate that program. And so on the very basis, we wanted folks in the field to have this information so that they could share it with those that they're working with. So just a basic slide. We have a few of these in the beginning here to cycle through. Disruptive student. And so again, as Jess and I are statewide, we are finding that what classifies a student as needing to attend Aedy had varied a little bit more than the regulation would permit. And so in terms of 1901C, specific to disruptive student, the student must possess a clear threat to safety and the welfare of others, students and staff, creating an unsafe school environment. And so when we were having conversations with those in the field, we were finding that the type of student that they were discussing with us was not necessarily to the level of the definition required by Aedy. So again, we're providing this information to the field so that they have the basis and the foundation when discussing with LEAs. So we have 6 reasons for placement in Aedy. We are consistently still seeing truancy as a reason for placement within the documentation, and that is no longer in effect. And so again, we're putting out this basic slide for folks in the field to use so that people understand the reason, and it is only these 6 reasons for which a student can be referred to an AEDY program.
Oh, sorry. Hold on.
No worries. All right. Okay. So at the latter part of March of this year, the Pennsylvania Department of Education received a signed settlement agreement with the Department of Justice. And the settlement agreement outlines specific areas that you as the field are seeing now in implementation in year 1. Specifically, the settlement agreement focused on the policies, practices regarding AEDY programs, and that the settlement agreement indicated that it led to violations of federal laws by our LEAs. And so PDE has begun its training and support through our team to the field statewide to support the settlement agreement and what we have agreed to do moving forward. Okay, so our next slide on our settlement agreement is that we must ensure that there are non-discriminatory practices in place for the AEDY referrals and placements, equal opportunities for students with disabilities, whether that be a student with a 504, a student who is thought to be eligible and in the process of an evaluation for special education, and any student identified as special education, as well as the timely exit of all students from AEDY. And so we are now tasked with looking at the non-discriminatory practices that all LEAs and private programs and CTCs and anyone who's operating in terms of an AEDY program, and ensuring that the access for students, all students, is present within the program. LEAs, and this is specifically from the settlement agreement, must not refer to an AEDY program and must not accept students with disabilities due to a behavior caused by their disability. And so while IEP teams and LEAs and programs meet, it's important that they refer to the regulatory authority that does or does not permit a student to be in the program. And so we're focusing the field to know 300, 530G, which are the 3 specific areas where a student with a disability may be placed within AEDY for a 45-day placement. And so you may copy and paste that and go to that regulation to know specifically what would prevent or what would allow you as a provider to accept or a district to send. Also within the settlement agreement is a 45-day presumptive review process. That is different than what the field has experienced in the past in terms of reviewing student data, in terms of their behavior plans, positive behavior plans, every semester. They are now required every 45 days, meaning that the capture of the student's start in the AEDY program 45 days from that initial day seated, the expectation would be that the review occur. So 45 days is new, and we're getting that information out to the field as we speak. Okay. Within the settlement, we are working now with our programs, specifically the LEAs, and in developing their local complaint process, as well as private programs and AEDY provider programs, for outlining how it is that they're going to work side by side with their LEAs to resolve any complaint that comes through, whether it be family, advocate, it would not matter where the complaint was driven from, just simply that the process met the minimum standard that the model set. PDE also has a complaint process required, and so we're working with our local LEAs and our AEDY providers to be able to ensure that complaints are timely, that they're resolved at the local level, and certainly that, you know, if any support is needed, that the AEDY team here, we would provide that support individually to the program or to the LEA. Also within the settlement agreement was the requirement for translation services of the document, and access to having that document when raising a concern. So when the family or when the student raised a concern or advocate raised a concern regarding the student's programming or the placement or the duration, whatever the circumstance is, and they requested for the documentation to be in native language or to simply have access to the form to fill out, that would all be outlined in the new procedures established not only at the local complaint level, but also at the PDE level. And so those of you who are on this call, and I appreciate you on with us today, know that you have been through that process with us to establish that for your LEA or your private program. Okay. Only a few more slides on the settlement, but I felt it was important to provide this information in print. English learner services and AEDY programs was an area of need and result that was driven from the settlement, specific to the Equal Educational Opportunities Act of 1974, and that PDE via the AEDY team work with our programs and LEA statewide for a process for approving our AEDY program, specifically through the oversight, monitoring, and site visits specific to students who are English learners, as well as our students with disabilities. You know, certainly that non-discriminatory practice must be in place and a process established whereby the monitoring visits occur on a triennial basis.
Okay. Sorry, we're sharing the screen. Oops.
Okay.
Sorry, there we go. Data collection, analysis, and reporting. The AEDY program application approval. You've all been through this process. All the providers have had to submit applications for approval, and they've been reviewed, you know, on a rolling basis by the AEDY team. We've been providing feedback regularly. We also have created a monitoring list for the upcoming year, which will include site visits, interviews, and file reviews. As part of that, you will be required to have action plans for training. If it is in terms of MTSS, the Positive Behavior Support Framework, we realize that that's not something you're going to turn the switch on, that it's going to require long-term training plans. So that would be a component of the application, as well as part of the monitoring and the follow-up corrective action. The semi-annual reporting occurs through May 2022. And we will be readily, they're checking in with us at a regular basis to ensure that students are getting what they need in these environments.
And so important from that note in terms of any reporting that we're providing, in the past what would happen is you would submit a single annual report at the end of the year. That Safe Schools report, it continues, but what Jess is referring to is that within the settlement agreement, there are specific areas of reporting. We're going to share a few of those with you later in the slides that we want you to know, because the data that goes into our leader services system that you're putting there is the data that will be pulled and reported. So our accuracy is critical, and we want to make sure that you know, our providers and our LEAs are on the same page in terms of knowing what they put in and what will be required to be reported out.
So the next one, sorry, go ahead.
So the next area that we want to share is the certifications for qualified personnel, holding our ESL, teacher credentials, and holding credentials required to instruct students with disabilities. So private program or LEA operated CTC, all programs must have documented within our current application process the ability to designate who and their credentials, their background checks, and their professional development. In addition, the settlement agreement required some pretty extensive training, which we're going to be laying out moving forward as we get through the first early parts of our setting up of the AEDY process and our training plan. But the settlement agreement requires specific training to the prohibition of discrimination, specific on the basis of a disability, so student with a disability or thought to be, and being disciplined in school to an AEDY program. So you can see why that would be something important for us to train on, so that the accurate referral and acceptance of referral within the system could happen for the student who's thought to be or has a disability. In addition, as Jess had indicated earlier, we're going to be providing some MTSS, positive behavioral support training. We understand, having talked to over hundreds of people statewide between Jess and myself in the last 2 months, that this is a heavy lift, and it is as they're building their training plans and support that they need, that while actively engaged in that, their application will continue to be provisional and be supported. The last area of training statewide will be for our English learners, and ensuring that there are LEA plans as well as implementation plans within the programs, the AEDY program. Okay, so the next area of the settlement agreement is that we will engage our parents and our students and our community for input. And so far we've had a few stakeholder sessions. We're going to be continuing to do that. Also know that through the monitoring process, while we're out in the field to many of our programs statewide this year, that this parent survey process within the monitoring will be informed in reporting. And so they're looking to know, right down to the family, what supports and services are different now and working or not working for their child in AEDY. So we're required to develop and deliver information to our families, understanding that they have rights within the AEDY process. We're required, as you are, to communicate in that language of accessibility, and to also make our information and our training and supports accessible to our parents and students with disabilities. Okay, so the monitoring site visits and the corrective action or program action plans that are due. So we'll be monitoring on site once within every 3 years, unless you're a new program. New programs will have a new on-site visit to confirm that application and to do that facility review. Teams will be on site. And so, you know, some of our programs that are in the monitoring process right now have already heard from us. They know who their team chair is, and some specifics about what's required. The program application is part of the monitoring process. Special ed and EL records are reviewed, and as a result of the entire monitoring, including the facilitated self-assessment, the surveys and interviews, the observation, and anything else collected, that an executive summary and response of corrective action, if necessary, or training, would be inclusive of PDE's response to the program and to the LEA. Okay, so in keeping in mind here, we've outlined a few things that we wanted to make sure that the field is aware of. And so we have certainly our special education procedures, and in conversation with those that have reached out to us, we are very explicit and clear in terms of the fact that AEDY is a temporary placement by the regulatory authority. And so there are specific reasons that a student may or may not enter, and there are specific reasons to special education where that manifestation determination being required for any student with a disability entering after that period of time that would constitute the number of days, a change in pattern, any student with an intellectual disability. And our special ed directors who are involved in the process of holding these meetings are aware that these procedures must be in place in order for any consideration by the team. FBAs, functional behavior assessments, and positive behavior support plans may be deemed necessary as a result of that determination. IEP team meetings are in place for our students who are entering our AEDY programs, so that FAPE, free and appropriate public education, can be provided within the disciplinary setting. We talked earlier about the 45-day review, and also about the students' transition out of AEDY within that 45-day review period or sooner. And that or sooner is important to note, because if the team determines that the student may have met their behavioral goals or individual behavioral goals, we would anticipate that transition occur. Okay, so within the application in the complaint process, we wanted to focus on certain areas that we've been noticing statewide just needed a little bit more support. So there's a local complaint process. There's also a PDE process. Must be accessible to families. There must be a timely resolve. And while a 60-day turnaround is something that would be, I don't want to say of a typical complaint, because there really isn't one, but that any critical factor that that is concerning to a family be addressed immediately towards that timely resolve. And certainly that through the application in the complaint process, that the complaint process in and of itself, either at the local level or the PDE level, does not limit any other rights or remedies under federal or state law for the student, meaning that the family can proceed with both, not just the complaint process. Okay, so within the application, we have some areas that, and I know I have a few, I'm looking at my participants here to see who's here in front of us today, but we have a few here who have entered information into the system, either as an LEA or as a provider. So a couple areas that people are needing some focus on are where the EL, English learner, assigning a teacher. And that click button here and that validation is critical. Because when that doesn't occur, you will not be able to resubmit to PDE to have your application reviewed. The adding of behavioral training for our English language teachers is necessary. And so there isn't a single area that can be bypassed through the validation. And so what we have instructed the field is that any teacher or staff member going into a program needs to have a basis of understanding of positive behavior support. If they elect to have them involved in some specific de-escalation training, if they're there on a regular basis, that decision would be a local decision, but that on the very foundation that teachers of English language students, English learners, would have a foundation for how to support the student that they're providing direct service to. The LEA has an English language plan, English learner plan that is uploaded into the system, and the provider, the AEDY provider, has an implementation plan for how it is on their premise under their 990 hours, they're going to be supporting that LEA plan and the student who's now under their roof receiving educational input. Okay, so just some other details here within our application that we've answered a number of times this week. We're asking our folks to go back and make sure they're validating. If they don't validate and submit, select that program and submit, it stays in their queue. Nobody else can access that information. And so while you know, some programs or LEAs felt that they had entered information and were done, when we went back and looked, we said you need to validate, select the program that you're sending to, and submit. All of our programs that have applied, our LEAs that have applied as well, have had an initial review. If you've submitted within the last, I would say 2 to 3 weeks, we're going through those who have just submitted for a timely turnaround of that initial review. After initial review and a follow-up by one of the 3 consultants, what occurs from there is that you will have some revisions possibly to make within the application process. The application is returned to you, and ultimately at the end of that communication between the consultants and the either provider or in-house or LEA, a provisional status letter will be sent to you through the application system through Leader Services, which will outline what next steps you may have to take as a result of the submission of the application. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that good faith effort to further support the guidance and training in the areas of special ed, English learners, positive behavior support, and the local complaint process are critical. So when our programs and LEAs are actively engaging the training plans and other supports to these new areas of focus within our Aedy programs, you know, that provisional status of the application continues to be in good standing. Okay, so within the LEA referral, so if I'm on the LEA side and I'm taking a look at the referral, you'll see each of these sections here that are outlined are the actual sections within the referral. I wanted to point out some specific areas of conversation that we've been having in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks with folks regarding the demographic information and the PA Secure ID, which is how the student enters into the system. So if I'm an LEA, I enter that student's PA Secure ID, at which point it connects to the demographic information to fill in those fields. If for some reason that is not available, it will allow the LEA to manually enter the information. What's important in this process is that if there is incorrect information in what has been pre-populated, that means that it's incorrect in your reporting to to PIMS, because that's where our linkage is to pulling the information. And so if there is incorrect information, we're asking you to go back to your submission and review that. You may deactivate any referral, okay? And we can support you through the correction if you're unable to get that information in. Also within the demographic page is an indication of whether the student has a 504. So you'll see the 504 field in addition to special education. And you'll also see English learner field, meaning that the student is a current EL learner. And all those designations are listed from putting the student demographic information in. Each of the next areas are required areas of the referral, and you cannot move ahead without validating and ensuring that each of the sections as it applies to the student has been addressed. Criteria is the 6 criteria mentioned earlier, and you may select more than one criteria. Behaviors and interventions must be filled out in detail prior to submission. And the informal hearing information must be uploaded with verifying that the students' due process rights were held whole, and that hearing had occurred and the parent had been contacted. The manifestation section is only required when the student is a student with a disability, and at any point you may validate to see where it is that you're missing information so that you can go back and expedite that quickly to fill it in. Okay, so this in-placement slide belongs to the provider. I know I have 1 or 2 on, and so in-placement, the first area that we're seeing statewide with the students that are in placement is that our providers must accept the referral. And so to accept the referral, you have to indicate yes or no as the provider, indicating expulsion for that period of time or not a no. The provider must accept the referral from that question on, entering that 45-day presumptive exit date. So that date is entered by the provider when the student begins on day 1. 5 days in, there's a meeting to confirm the student's information and to make sure that the student's record is whole and that they have a behavior plan, a positive behavior support plan, and they're ready to go and collecting their data in the next 45 days or less. Okay, so beginning in placement and returning to gen ed obviously is our goal here. And so that 45-day presumptive date exit is entered again by the provider. And when the provider has not accepted the referral, that 45-day count has not begun. So it's important that communication occurs between the LEA and the provider in order for the system and the reporting to have accurate 45-day counts. Students, as I had said earlier, may exit sooner. The decision for remaining in AEDY or transitioning to the LEA occurs at that presumptive exit date meeting, whether it be at day 10 or day 44, that a decision be made based upon the student's goal, which was the criteria upon them entering AEDY. And so following that, the provider selects remaining or transitioning. And then following that, the LEA accepts the student within the system, returning them to general education. Okay, critical again in this process is that our rosters, which are our students in placement, and certainly any student in process that might not be, whose referral might not have been completed, that if any student is seated in AEDY, they must have a referral in placement. They may not be in a paper form, and they may not be in process. And so it is critical that our rosters are up to date, and our colleagues in our AEDY team have been communicating that with the field to this information, so that each party, whether you're the LEA sending or the provider receiving, that there is accountability to the student's number of days and to what they need to ultimately exit AEDY. You know, certainly there's an ability to verify the demographic information. An EL teacher is required in order to enter the application process. And so how that translates into a student who is an English learner is that within the referral, there is a coordination of that support and service to that student receiving their EL services. So I've put a few things here that if you're not in process, meaning that the student is not in the process of entering AEDY, we request for you to deactivate that student. So no student should be entered into our system, into the system, unless they're in process to AEDY. So on a weekly, bi-weekly basis, individuals within the LEA need to ensure that the students that are listed are truly students who are going to AEDY placement. Our providers, we want to ensure that everyone accepts the referrals coming through. We have 45 days to or less to report. And inactive in placement could mean that they have already exited. So I have put here, when in doubt, ask, and we're here to support, because we do understand that the referral process is ongoing and that there are specific circumstances that we are working through individually as we ensure the student's record and supports are in place towards their exit. Okay, so in speaking of exit, we have our transition to LEA. Positive behavior support equals meeting that individual behavior goals. So when we know that our programs are providing positive behavior supports and a framework for a multi-tiered system of support through maybe initial training in year one, we know that students will, as a result of that good training and support, positive, that more students will be meeting their individual behavior goals. Personalizing the transition of the student into their general education program is the goal. And so to see standard, I don't want to say standard, but to see like transition plans is not necessarily what the student needs. So the transition team, inclusive of the IEP team if the student is a student with a disability, or that EL teacher support if they're a student with EL, needs to be able to personalize that transition so that it is ultimately successful for that student towards general education. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to share was our reporting requirement. And so programs must report to PDE every semester data regarding the students with a disability who've remained beyond their presumptive exit dates, including the reasons why the students have remained and the newly established presumptive exit dates. And so you see three categories of information that will be obtained from the data and reporting of the LEA and the AEDY program. Okay, so this is a very, this is a short list. We're going to be putting together a list now that we have under our belts probably close to hundreds, I'm just going to say, applications that we have reviewed and hundreds of student referrals that have been entered. We now are entering our monitoring season. We'll be able to personalize and support some training specific to students with disabilities and English learners, and that so what we have here listed is our FBA trainings. I highly, highly recommend that if your team does not have an FBA training, that you consider going to one of these. We're also doing a second round of our QBS Safety Care Train the Trainer, and that'll be in March. And then also we wanted to inform the field that there will be an AEDY conference that will occur here in spring in the month of April. So we just wanted you to block off that time so that we can gather as a group to you know, to present and support the field in our AEDY conference. Okay, so I want to thank everyone and just appreciate those of you who stayed on our call today. And I will be getting back to everyone how and where to register for the trainings. I understand we need to send out our registration codes, and I appreciate the field communicating that to us here. I will be getting that out tomorrow. We'll send out a master and it will be within the Leader Services Communication Weekly send out. I will have at the base of that information the trainings that I just mentioned, and I'll make sure that the registration codes are there for everyone. So I appreciate the reach out. We are reading, although very furiously, through our emails and supports, but continue letting us know where and how we can support, and we'll do our best from this one. Thank you.
Thank you.